Had a health topic except for last week when we had our week of prayer. Tonight's health topic is unintentional injuries. And with us, we have a special guest, Dr. Felix. And he is here. So we say amen for that. So Dr. Felix, we're just going to invite you up so you can just go into your presentation.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be in his house today, and always a privilege. If he wakes us up in the morning and we have the breath of life and we have the strength to put on our clothes, we're already blessed. We're already blessed, and so it's a unique privilege. And I want to thank Brother Aiden for inviting me in and for the men's ministry for allowing me to share on this topic.
Thank you for watching our live stream
I'm a licensed
today.
mental health counselor.
If you'd like more uplifting content, I invite you to go over to our website, PlantationSDA.tv, where you can find our sermons and praise and worship experiences archived there. If you have a praise report or a praise request that you would like to give, I invite you to go over to our church website, PlantationSDA.org, where you can be able to enter your prayer requests on our site. And if you're ever in the Plantation, Florida area, we invite you to join us here for a live worship service. Until then, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
He's created us as spiritual beings.
I want to thank you for joining us for our worship service today. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you are blessed. If you are looking for more uplifting content, I'd like to invite you to join us at Plantation SDA TV for more uplifting.
And we see that, even from the beginning of creation, where God had created this beautiful earth, had placed humankind and gotten them going. And yet, he said there was something missing. There was an emotional connection missing. There was a physical connection missing. And so he started all over again and created woman and got it right. You'll appreciate my sense of humor by the time we leave. But in all, I'm so glad that I can talk about a very important topic here tonight, unintentional injuries. And I've asked Brother Aiden the permission to broaden it a little bit. Broaden it a little bit. When we think about issues that impact men, specifically, we could talk a lot about different illnesses, and we could talk a lot about the violence that occupies our streets, the violence that fills our street. But one that we sometimes don't place enough attention to is unintentional injuries. And trying to understand what can bring about an unintentional injury is very important, and how perhaps unintentional injuries are related to depression and also the stress that we experience in our lives. And so I'm going to talk, for a few minutes on these three areas and help us to see how they are definitely all interconnected in many ways. When we look at the number of unintentional deaths here in the United States, it's about 161,000. Over 161,000 people die annually from unintentional death. And unintentional injuries basically means that the person is not trying to harm themselves. They're not suicidal. They're not trying to end their life or do personal harm. It's an accident that somehow occurs. But that accident not only is it an injury, but it can also cost them their lives, And so here in the United States, we have about 161,000. And of those, 34,000 involve unintentional death caused by falls, And my brother just mentioned one of the members here falling. And fortunately, he was able to get help immediately, it sounds like, and go through the procedures. But some falls are definitely fatal. Some falls, depending on what part of the body that you hit, particularly if you experience head trauma, it can naturally lead to immediate death, or it can impair the body and then eventually lead to death. Or a person may fall in a position, in a place where it's falling stories. And so falls account for a significant portion of unintentional injuries. In addition to that, we have motor vehicle accidents. Men in particularly, when death is involved in an accident, research tells us that men are 4 times likely to have been drunk, have been impaired by alcohol when it comes to motor vehicle accidents. take away the alcohol, take away the use of substances, we still have motor vehicle accidents. Sometimes it's because we lose control of our car. Sometimes it's because we get distracted by something or another. Sometimes it could be the phone, it could be a conversation, or something on the street, and we lose focus, and we can easily engage in an accident. So that's a significant challenge in our society. Men also experience, people will also die unintentionally from poisoning, from poisoning. They're not, again, trying to harm themselves, but they're ingesting somehow the wrong substance. And to this list, as far as the causes, all the numbers are not represented here, but we have a lot of individuals dying, losing their lives from unintentionally shooting themselves, or being shot by someone else, maybe cleaning a gun or maybe playing with a gun. A lot of people die in fires, particularly in homes, And in many cases, research again shows us that a good majority of people who die, when they die in a fire in a home, there's sometimes usually substance use involved. So either during the use of the substance, the house got set on fire, or the person is impaired and cannot find their way out of that fire. So unintentional injuries are pretty rampant in our society. And to show you that, when we look at causes of death overall, the leading cause of death is what? It's heart disease. It's heart disease. More prevalent among men or women? More prevalent among men. In fact, I'm sure you've been sharing this week, a lot of the leading illnesses, they're more prevalent among men. Number 2, cancer. And look at number 3, unintentional injuries, as far as the leading causes of death. Not gun violence. We're exposed to a lot in our community, and it usually makes the headlines. But it's almost as if unintentional injuries are the silent killer. That if not careful, again, it can lead to significant harm. And then from there, we add chronic diseases, lung diseases. We add strokes, Alzheimer's, diabetes, influenza, kidney function issues, and also the last one is the reverse of number 3. It's intentional self-harm. This is when a person is suicidal and they act accordingly to take their own life. Okay? So the leading causes of death. Now, what does depression and stress perhaps have to do with unintentional injuries? Well, let's take a look at depression. 66.7% of individuals in the United States are likely to suffer from depression each year. Okay, we have how many individuals in the United States? 300 million plus. And so at 6%, we're looking at about 18 million people suffer from depression on an annual basis. And during a person's lifetime, 16.5% of individuals will likely experience depression at some point during their lifetime, whether during their childhood years, teenage years, early adult years, middle life years, or late adulthood years. And depression is more prevalent among women. While women have a 70% more chance of developing depression, it's a significant problem among men. And when we look at this particular statistics, 70%, I would say that it's probably higher among women, just simply because women go in for treatment. And so they're diagnosed with depression. Okay? If we were to really look at it, I would say the numbers are probably a little bit closer. There isn't that significant disparity between men and women. Perhaps women still higher, but I don't think it's like 70 to 1. And so when we look at depression among men, it often goes undetected. Often goes undetected. Why is that, perhaps? We don't talk. We don't admit. We try to rough it out. We gotta push through it. We gotta press. We gotta press through it. We gotta pull up our pants and keep moving. because many times we see depression as a weakness. He's just soft. He just can't handle life issues and so forth. It's how sometimes we talk about depression. Or we simply view it, it's just the blues. It's no big thing. It'll come and it goes. B.B. King used to sing a lot about, the blues and the whole genre. And I really talk about suffering, when you think about it. Further on, there's that pressure to toughen it out, There's also the stigma of actually going for help, going to see a clinician, or just simply telling someone else that you're having a hard time, Culturally, we approach it differently. And so many other things may impact also men's, whether a man will seek help. Will he find another man or someone else that will understand him and will not add another label to the litany of labels that sometimes our brothers endure in our larger society. The challenge with all of this is that when we have depression, unless depression is treated, it can what? It can lead to death, It can lead to death. It can lead the individual, both death unintentionally, and this is where the connection is, because when we experience depression, what does depression look like? Well, let's take a look at that, and then I'm going to answer that point that I made. When we experience depression, there's this inability to feel. There's that loss of hopelessness, inability to truly connect with others, and so it impacts our love life. It impacts our ability to attach. Sometimes we experience depression as just being numb or emotionally flat. Nothing really moves us. Nothing excites us. It impacts our ability to concentrate, our ability to think. Just being able to read a newspaper, sometimes it's hard to follow because that requires, a significant level of energy. It slows down our ability to process information. It takes us longer, perhaps, to make decisions because we're not as sharp. When we also look when a person experiences depression, how do they view themselves? They often view themselves negatively. I'm unworthy. I'm a failure. I failed again. I will never achieve. A person may also experience a lot of guilt, for whatever reason when they are depressed. And then there's definitely that sense of hopelessness about the current situation. It's not going to change. And hopelessness about the future situation. Nothing is ever going to be different. And so if we don't experience hope, what's the alternative? We experience despair. In despair, we give up. We pull back and we basically succumb to whatever life pressure, life challenge that we are facing. And so all of this then eventually creates a lot of pain, a lot of emotional and also physical pain for the individuals. And many times this is when the person begins to become suicidal as a way of escaping that pain. They begin to consider the possibility of even taking their own life to escape from it all. And sometimes, as Christians, we may even spiritualize it. I'm ready to see Jesus. And the reality is that we're dealing with some heavy things, some heavy things. And when we look at differences between men and women, when it comes to suicide, when it comes to suicidal attempt, who do you think, which gender perhaps attempts more suicides? Okay, we're kind of split on that one. How about which gender is more successful in completing suicide? Okay, you got that one right. Okay, the result, the truth is that more women, it's almost 1 to 4 or even 1 to 10. More women attempt suicide, but more men are successful in completing suicide. The reason that is that many times a woman may attempt suicide by slashing her wrists, by taking pills, and so forth. But when a man attempts to take his own life, he uses more lethal means. He'll use a weapon. He'll jump off a building. He'll hang himself. And so the chances of being successful, quote unquote, are much stronger because it's a more lethal force. And so more brothers are losing their lives, sadly, to to suicide. And when we look at how depression impacts a person's motivation, again, you lose your you lose your desire to push forward. You lose interest in what perhaps brought you joy, what perhaps brought you satisfaction. Even if that included being part of the men's group or being part of church or going to work or hanging out with family. You lose interest in those things. You develop a level of sadness. You develop what we call anhedonia. It's just a very down mood, a very sad mood. And physically, when a person experiences depression, they're either going to have trouble sleeping. The quality of their sleep is going to change. They're either going to have problems falling asleep, or they'll wake up often, or it'll be on the opposite end. They'll sleep for longer periods of time. A person who's depressed, no problem sleeping 12 hours of a 24-hour day, and still yet feel tired when they wake up. Appetite is the same way. During depression, your appetite can either increase. In other words, a person may be what we call an emotional eater and try to numb the depression by engaging in food, or they may lose their appetite altogether. There can be weight gain, or there could be weight loss, and so it can go on either spectrum. And then, of course, a person can experience a lot of crying spells, or you find yourself you're crying and you have no idea why am I crying. And it's perhaps because there's maybe some type of grief that never did occur, that needs to occur, allowing themselves to experience the emotions. And now, when we look at their activity, if a person is going through depression, and I'm talking about what we call unipolar depression, not bipolar depression. Unipolar depression, we usually are talking about sadness. The loss of interest. They'll be restless. Talking will take a lot of effort. Engaging with someone takes a lot of effort when you're depressed. And so, what eventually happens to the individual in their relationships? They start pulling back. They start withdrawing from communicating with others, from relating with others, from interacting with others. And as they do that, what do you think happens to the depression? It gets worse. It gets worse. When the word says it's not good for man to be alone, God knew what he was talking about. There's something in us. He's created us for relationship. And I, theologically speaking, I often look at it in the sense that if his image is in us, and if we understand the image of God, we have Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There's relationship there. There's bonding there. There's unity there. Jesus in his moments of agony, where did he go? He went to pray. He went to relate to his Father. And so God's image in us yearns for relationship. And when we're not in relationship, in the context of relationship, it impacts our well-being. It impacts our mental health. When you take a prisoner and you want to punish them further, what do? You isolate them. And when you isolate them, what happens? It impacts the psyche. It impacts the psyche. And so depression definitely can get worse when we isolate ourselves. Now, among teenagers, it may look a little bit differently. With teenagers, you'll probably see a sudden drop of grades. You'll probably see all of a sudden that child is acting out, maybe talking back more than they usually do because they're more irritable. They may start using substances, again, to numb the pain. You may see promiscuous sexual behavior, and you'll see the withdrawal also, the isolation that begins to occur. So all of that is unipolar depression. Now, there's another type of depression. I'm not going to go too much into it, but when we talk about bipolar depression, it's almost as if we're talking about the opposite side, where rather than having a low mood, the person has an elevated mood, where there's an intensity in which they interact. They engage in a lot of what we call goal-directed behaviors that are dangerous. They take more risks. Their judgment is impaired. In other words, the person can go to the mall and put out $5,000 like it's nothing. They can go and begin to engage in promiscuous sexual behavior like it's nothing. All because of the depression. You'll see that they'll talk at a more rapid pace and so forth. So with bipolar depression, there's also the high risk of unintentional injury. You know, when a person has bipolar and they're on the high end, when they're in that manic stage, there's almost this idea that they're invincible. You know, so they're more likely to do what? Engage in riskier behaviors. Vehicle accidents are more prone if a person is in a manic episode. Imagine someone who is driving a motorcycle and they're in a manic phase. You're going to see them zipping through traffic because of that sense of I'm invincible, I can't get hurt. And so that's where unintentional injuries can occur. On the latter part of depression, when a person's experiencing the down mood, also that can be connected to a lot of vehicular accidents. You know, if your concentration is impaired, if your reaction time is slower, you know, you're thinking you have a whole minute to make that turn, but your perception is impacted by the depression, so you're more likely to engage in these vehicle accidents. You're more likely to engage in these unintentional behaviors where you are accidentally harming yourself and could potentially lose your life. Now, another factor that is important to understand is the cause of depression. You know, and it's multiple factors. You know, we can look at the genetics. What we find is that when one person in the family has depression, other members of the family have a higher chance of also experiencing depression. You know, the next generation has a higher chance of experiencing depression than someone who never had depression in their families. And that could be related to, again, the chemical, our brain structures and how our bodies relate. When we look at brain chemistry, you know, we have these things, these chemicals in our brain that are these hormones in our brain, these neurotransmitters in our brain that control our mood. You know, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, they control our mood. They allow us to experience these different drives. You know, when these chemicals are off, when they're not where they're supposed to be, then you will see symptoms of depression, you know, being expressed. And so sometimes when a person is given medication for depression, it's to help adjust these chemicals in our brains. But one of the factors that truly impact depression is stress. You know, it's stress, and stress shows itself in many ways. But one of the ways that it does show itself is through depression. Now, there are different types of stress, okay? There's different types of stressors. We have what we call residual stress. This is stress that's something happened in the past. You know, the person experienced some type of trauma. You know, the trauma could have been a loss. The trauma could have been an abuse. The trauma could have been some type of harm that happened in the past, but yet still dominates them. They're still stressed out by them. They're still reliving that stress. And many times they may be suffering also from post-traumatic stress. So that's residual stress. And then we also have the situational stress. You know, traffic is bad, and I'm late for the interview, and I need a job. You know, that's going to be experienced as a stressful event. You know, financial pressures. That's situational. That can be experienced as a stressor. Having a family member who is ill, that can bring a lot of stress for someone. And then we also go through what we can call chronic stressors. This is where we may be dealing with a chronic illness itself. You know, we may be dealing with in challenges in our environment. You know, let's say if there's a lack of safety where we live, you know, and we're constantly under threat of harm. That's a chronic stress. You know, poverty is a chronic stress. If you're always having to, I wonder if I'm going to make it this month to pay this bill and to pay this bill, that has an impact on a person's overall health. And then the thing also with stress is that we can experience anticipatory stress. You know, if I tell you, you know, there's a Siberian tiger outside, y'all, what will happen? Will we need to see it to experience something? No. If there's a if the zoo lost the tiger and it ended up in the front yard of the church, you know, you don't need to see the tiger. You just need to hear the news that there's a tiger out there and that's coming our way. And because you anticipate the tiger walking into the sanctuary, God forbid, you already worked up worked up. And then you find out, well, the person who was giving the announcement, they got their words confused. What they meant was a cat, a little cat, and they said tiger, And so you're all worked up for nothing, And that happens in life, We think something is going to happen. We're scared of it, so we get worked up as if it's happening today. And it impacts us, and it impacts our overall health. And then if we add work demands, work pressures, family demands, family obligations, if we add the losses that we experience when we lose loved ones, or we lose jobs, or we lose homes, all of these are stressors. The heat that we have in Florida can be a stress. It's an environmental stress. And as we said, finances can also be a significant stress. And there's one that we don't often look at. This one has a stressor that impacts health, but it really does. If we start talking about the experience of racism, the experience of discrimination, that's a stressor. When a person experiences discrimination from someone else, when a person is treated in a degrading manner, they're treated that way because whoever is perpetrating that discriminatory act is basically saying, you are inferior. And they're acting in ways to do what? To make you feel that you are inferior. The daily barrage of that discriminatory behavior impacts a person's health. And I'm convinced that we have a lot of brothers in jail today. Not that they were violent, but I think the accumulation of all those stressors triggered and contributed to their depression, which just manifested itself in a violent act of some sort. The daily barrage of being told you're less than, that impacts a person's health. And so with that, when we deal with stress, we deal with daily stressors, and we can have what we call an alarm reaction. It's stressful. Traffic is backed up, and I'm stressed up because I don't want to be late for work. And so what do? I get off the highway and I try to find some back road. I eventually make it on time. Stress is gone. Next thing. Let's move on to the next thing. Or sometimes stress can be present a little bit longer. And every time that we get stressed up, we experience stress, our body prepares to respond to that stress. That fight and flight, that fight or flight kicks in. Our heart rate increases, our perspiration increases, our breathing increases. The body naturally responds to be able to respond to stressors. The only challenge is that if your body's constantly in that state of stress response, it takes away from your immune system. And that's basically what it does. It takes the energy away. So when we experience chronic stressors, we're more likely to experience burnout. We're more likely to experience other illnesses. We're more likely to experience something that has a cold much more easily than when we are at a place where we're rested, where we're peaceful. And so stress definitely, different levels of stress can definitely impact us in different ways. Now, one of the things that we see is that physically, most people can experience stress, has aches. You kind of feel it usually first right here in that triangle. You feel your shoulders, you feel your back, your muscles become tense. Sometimes people may experience stress as constipation. You may experience the chest pains, the rapid heartbeat. You may experience frequent colds, as we said. We experience that muscle tensions. These are all can be all physical manifestations of stress. And then when we look at our emotional symptoms, we become moody. We become more irritable. We become more quick. In our responses, less tolerant. We don't want to deal with people. Just leave me alone. Too much. Come on, stop. And so why? Because we're worked up. We're stressed. We're stressed. So a general unhappiness. Not only that, we also find that we begin to it impacts the memory. Something as simple as, where did I put those things? When you're in a hurry the most and you're stressed out that you can't find them, study all night long, and then show up for the test. If they're stressed out, they go blank. They know the information, but there's a part of the brain that shuts down literally because of stress. So it impacts the person's ability to concentrate. Stress impacts our judgment. Stress makes us more anxious, and the constant worrying is usually there. And so sometimes behaviorally, then we either lose our appetite or we eat more. We isolate ourselves, or we try to numb it by using substances, alcohol, cigarettes, other drugs that we are exposed to. We live in a society where I believe one more state became, I believe, the 11th state to legally sanction the recreational use of marijuana. Just this past week, 11 states, where you can smoke weed and just enjoy a good time. The only challenge with that, for me, from a clinical perspective, is that, again, why do people many times use drugs? As a way to escape the stressors that they are experiencing. And so I believe, I would say that we're developing a culture that we're emphasizing the wrong way to cope with stressors. And we often see marijuana as a gateway drug, it plays a role, and then people move on from that drug to something even stronger, Again, I'm not talking about medical marijuana. That's a different category. I'm just talking about recreational drugs. And so we see the increase of drugs many times when people are under stress. You look at someone who smokes. If you smoke a cigarette, nicotine is one of the drugs that rushes to the brain much faster. When a person is addicted to a cigarette and they're under stress, they become irritable, they become shaky, they experience the shakes. But the minute that they take that nicotine, it's almost this immediate release. And so it makes the habit very difficult to break. Now, also with that, put it all together, high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, these are all related to that we experience. And so with that, we have to understand, perhaps how do we deal with these? How do we deal with the stress so that it doesn't lead to depression, and that depression doesn't lead to the unintentionally harming ourselves or intentionally harming ourselves? Well, we can look at it from a cognitive perspective, how we think, and how our emotions are tied to how we think. We can look at some behavioral strategies, some social strategies, as well as what can we do spiritually to help us navigate through life's challenges and minimize and lower the chances that we'll develop these illnesses. So when we put it all together, we can say that the way we think impacts how we feel. How we feel leads to our behavior, impacts our behavior. Imagine two neighbors, for example, both lose their home due to a hurricane, and they're both standing in their front yard looking at their home. One says, "Man, I don't know what I'm going to do. I've lost everything." The other looks at his home, same level of destruction, says, "Wow, all right. It's an opportunity to rebuild and do it better." Just that approach, the difference in the approach, what do you think will be the outcome of these two, the ways that these two individuals are thinking? One is going to fall into a level, could possibly fall into a level of depression, because they're already looking at it from a negative perspective, a defeated perspective. It's a real perspective. Yes, it's difficult, but because there's already that sense of hopelessness, it's only going to can bring on possibly even more, versus the other who's looking at, okay, this happened, I'm acknowledging it, what can I do? What can I do better? So how we think impacts how we feel, and how we feel many times ends up leading our choices and our behavior. And so when you think of the way that we think, sometimes we say to ourselves, I've completely failed. That's the way that if I'm thinking I completely failed, then I'm going to feel sorrow. I'm going to feel guilt. But sometimes just balancing that a little bit. Yeah, I didn't do as well as expected. There you go. That's a great difference between I completely failed. I didn't do as well as expected, but I could do different tomorrow. Or I'm all alone. I'm all alone. David dealt a lot with that. Psalms 113, he's like, Lord, where are you? How long are you going to let me drown in my tears? Am I going to experience the sleep of death? I don't know if David was suicidal there, but he was talking about some serious agony, feeling distant from God. And sometimes, we feel that way when it comes to God. We feel that way when it comes to people, because we feel that people around us may not understand us. The reality is that I'm not alone. I can find support. I can find support. Or this will never change. Is that the truth? I believe we sing about God being able. If there is a God, there is possibility for change. We just have to ask, can these bones live? And the answer is always yes, if God says yes. And so I can, being open to trying something different. Naturally, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to perhaps experience the same results. But being open to a different approach. I can't overcome this. No, I can get some help and have someone come alongside me to go through this difficult season. And so the way we think is very critical in how we approach situations and how we respond to situations. The other thing that we could also do is behaviorally, we need to keep ourselves active. We need to keep ourselves active. Physical exercise goes right along with well-being, with mental health, because the body releases. God's created us in a way that when we're engaged in physical activity, it releases those hormones, it releases those neurotransmitters that pick up our mood. And so that's critical for our health in helping to regulate the body. Taking time to relax. Engaging in progressive relaxation. That's just the idea of tensing up your different parts of your body and then releasing to experience what it feels like to be in a relaxed state. Sometimes just taking time to breathe. Because what happens when we're nervous, when we're anxious? What do? We tense up. Our breathing becomes shallow. As your breathing becomes shallow, what happens to your muscles? They tense up even further. And so taking time to just relax the body, calm the body down, and that impacts also how you feel, and then how you feel impacts how you begin to think. What we eat, eating healthily as best we can is part of taking care of this temple, certain foods tend to have a great tendency to lead towards certain illness versus others that build up our health. Issues like drugs and alcohol, definitely they have a negative impact. If that's our means of coping, then we definitely have to work on that to rid those from our use. Taking time to just have fun, the old saying that laughter is good medicine. It really is, Sometimes it is so, getting a good laugh is so good that it makes you cry, and you feel the release. We can't diminish the value of healthy relationships, And so remaining connected as much as we can, What you guys are doing tonight, you're coming together. You're joining in worship together, and you're separating in small groups to do what? To pray for one another. You're sharing, you're connecting, you're taking on each other's burden. You invested in your well-being tonight. You invested in your mental health, and so taking time to relate to others, taking time to talk, taking time to I'll say volunteer. One of the research shows us that individuals, if they're one of the ways that you deal with anxiety, people who tend to be anxious, you get them to volunteer at different places. Why? Because when you volunteer at different places, you're doing what? You're taking the focus off of you and your issues, and you're going out to help someone else. That brings balance. That brings it into a better context. Sometimes managing stress involves improving in our conflict resolution skills. We all have issues. All relationships have challenges because you're talking about relationships between two different people. Two different people will have different expectations, and when the expectations are not met, it leads to tension, it leads to conflict. But if we learn to properly communicate, then we could resolve those conflicts, and those conflicts can actually lead to intimacy rather than distance. And then lastly, when we think of the spiritual strategies, when it comes to stress, I would say my life verse comes from Philippians 4 verse 6 and 7, where it is say, be not anxious about anything. Be not anxious about anything. And I love the fact that verse in the Bible, because it acknowledges that we can be anxious. We go through life circumstances, and there's so many things on a daily basis that can lead us to be anxious, that can lead us to be stressed. But the verse is, don't be anxious about anything, but instead do what? Present your requests to God. Take it off your back, bring it to the Lord. Bring your requests to the Lord with what? With thanksgiving. I love that piece, because thanksgiving forces you to look at the whole picture. Yes, this incredible bill is in front of me, but God, you've gotten me this far, You've gotten me through some stuff before, and I could thank you for that, And so it brings our thinking really into balance, It's not all bad. No, there's some things I can be grateful for. The very fact that I'm praying means that I'm breathing, and that's something to be grateful for, And so when we bring our thanksgiving, we bring our requests, it says what? The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts, And then the next verse, in verse 8, what does it say? If anything is pure, noble, good report, praiseworthy, true, think on these things. If you focus your minds on all the wrong stuff, then you're going to be impacted by all the wrong stuff. But when you place your minds on the things that come from God, the verse ends by saying, and God, not only that you'll experience God's peace, but you're going to experience God himself, who is peace. And so God has created us as physical, emotional, spiritual beings to live in community with him. And he gives us the privilege to live in community with one another. And so when we do experience these challenges, when we do experience these stressors, let's bring it before him, and let's deal with them in the context of community. And I would say that our greatest example was Christ himself, experiencing the agony of the cross that was before him. He felt the heaviness. And so what did he do? Not only did he go to pray to his heavenly Father, but he says, Peter, James, and John, you guys come with me. I need your support right now. Now, they let him down. They fell asleep. They fell asleep. But he shows us that we need relationships. We need community to be able to navigate through the stages of life, to be able to successfully live our lives for his honor, for his glory. And with that, God bless you.
Well said, my brother. Thank you so much. Thank you. Alrighty, as is customary, we get together and in circle, reach out, touch somebody's hand, and okay. All right, so let's stand and pray. Father God, we're truly grateful, dear Father, that you're God, and you made us, dear Father, in your image. Dear God, we're thankful, dear Father, that we can come to you, dear Father, with our stress, with our anxieties, whatever the situation may be, dear Father. And we can bring it all to you, dear Father, and you can put it together. Thank you for the message we've had this evening, dear God. We ask that you'll just be with us, dear Father, and take us home safely. For those who are watching online, we thank you for them, dear Father. And we ask that you continue to touch their hearts, touch their lives, dear Father. Just continue to bless us, dear Father. Help us, dear Father, as a people and as a community. We will continue to hold steadfast to you, knowing, dear Father, that soon and very soon we'll have a place with you in your eternal kingdom. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let's just get together in circle and see our testimony or Thanksgiving, whatever it be.
Thank you for joining our live stream today. I hope you enjoyed today's program and that you were truly blessed. Please know that until we live stream again, you are welcome to join us at Plantation psdatv for more uplifting videos. And if you have a prayer request or there's something that you want us to pray for you about, please go ahead and send us a request at plantationsda.org. And also, please know that if you're ever in the Plantation area, stop by and say hello. We'd welcome you with open arms. Thank you again, and I hope you're blessed.